Ben, perhaps can we ask you to tell us your story of experience with wet season burning?
A similar story to Andrew's. The wet season burning has been something that I've practiced for a long time, mostly on a smaller scale. So I guess the opportunities for wet season burning is tied to access and finding those opportunities, the right place at the right time. So experimenting with wet season burning and watching what happens, which you normally can if you can get to the place that you can wet season burn. You can normally keep visiting it as time progresses. So I think, but yeah, on that broader scale, I guess is just what I want to talk about. And I suppose, talking about, if we talk about the western top end and how fire prone it is, if we're trying to reduce the frequency of burning and the seasonality, shifting away from those late dry season fires, which has been something that we've been working on as fire managers for a while, but it's a bit tricky. So I just wanted to point out this, I guess, this little trap that you get into with fire management, and that's the if we burn less, we end up with a higher fire risk, and if we're burning less severe, we've got more fuel. So it's a pretty simple equation: fuel accumulation, particularly those fine fuels that carry the fire. So we do good fire management 1 year, which is probably lucky. It's the first year you can get away with that. To do it 2 years in a row, you have to be lucky or be doing something right. To be able to do that, stabilise our fire management on a landscape scale year after year has certainly been, I guess, a big challenge for the bigger states, and that's where we're seeing the boom and bust cycle. And so I guess the predicament is, if we're thinking about to turn a fire regime around sustainably, we're kind of lucky in the savannah because it tells us pretty quick whether we're sustainable or not. If we can get away with it for 4 or 5 years, and maybe you have got past that some ways down. So we've climbed up the coconut tree. We're at the top. How do we get back down? So you see most of the, Greg mentioned grazing, and if you look at NAFI, you can see the pastoral estate doesn't burn very often, and thanks to cows, that's the alternative pathway for grass, is grazing. But that doesn't mean it's great for obviously grazing has got its impacts, and it hasn't proven to be fantastic for our landscape and particularly fauna either. So then you can get stuck in this, you can burn earlier. So if we have more grass, we can left over at the end of the wet season or previous dry season, we can burn earlier. But then you're stuck in that grass fire cycle that leads to more of the annual grasses. And so number 3, we're thinking about more strategic burning, and that's, I guess, what I spend my time doing, is planning the early dry season burning, reducing the fire frequency and changing the seasonality, but also to keep the fire risk in a manageable level as well. So, but of course that's resource intensive, and there's a limit to the scale you can do strategic burning as well. And increasingly we're seeing fire suppression in some of the really big landscapes, particularly in Arnhem Land. So that's become an important part of the fire management. Fire suppression is hard to see on a fire map, but it's a significant amount of effort goes into, an increasing amount of effort goes into fire management, fire suppression in Arnhem Land every year. But there's a catch there too with the feedback. If the more successful fire management, we're still not dealing with that underlying fire risk. I guess the wet season burning as an alternative exit from a high fuel load state and a high fire risk when it's particularly in those annual grass dominated landscape. the potential, I guess, a quite an important lever, whether that timing to lever it away from, a grassy landscape for a few years. And then if we scale that up to a landscape, which I'll just show. So a lot of our stuff is rangers is seeing and doing on the ground and repetitive and learning from those. But to scale decisions up to the landscape scale for wet season burning or anything really, this is just an example of I guess a decision tree and some of those contraindicators for wet season burning as well. So that we can only wet season burn on stuff that didn't burn the year before. It should be we should be targeting areas that have a typically high fire frequency. Those are considerations about scale. So, for wet season patches to endure for a while, it's better to pick a decent size area. But on the other hand, we don't want to burn every bit of old grass in the region either. So, and this particular example is about the Gaulian finch habitat in the Yinbury Hills to help them be a bit more resilient to the threats of mining. So it's about using wet season burning to diversify the grass resources. So they've got plenty of speargrass, and they love it. That speargrass is a great food resource. I mean, it's an amazing plant that can turn, nutrient poor waterlogged soils into this nutritious little kernel of seed across the whole landscape. So I'm the first to defend speargrass as a really important resource that makes things fat, that fledges Gaulian finch chickens. I think that's what you call them, chicks. But that doesn't keep Gaulian finches alive at the first rains. We need a few other species of grass for that, and some. Helping diversify the grass when there's too much speargrass, while avoiding the negative impacts of wet season burning that might be high erosion or promotion of weeds and things like that. So scaling that up different, so that's a decision tree, I guess, to help us think bigger scale for wet season burning, broader scale. My next slides are just a quick, there's quite a few of them, so I will go through fairly quick. An example from Manyaluluk, which I involved in with Jawoyn Rangers in their fire management program. So there it is, Manyaluluk near the Catherine River, adjacent to Nitmiluk. So Manyaluluk's a fire-prone valley, so soils are granitic soils, so pretty open woodland, kind of fertile in a way that there's fresh nutrients coming from eroding granite, good rainfall, and it gets frequently burnt. So that little, it's getting burnt most years in some places. And so how to get out of that little cycle. So the next slide is the 2019's fire scars at the end of the season, I believe. So if we're familiar with those NAFI colours, most of the prescribed burning was undertaken in May and June, a little bit in April. And then we've got patches of unburnt that were progressively, some struck by lightning, some lit by people. And so at the end of the 2019, there's some patches of old grass in that, and one notable one. I guess scaling up to the landscape scale, thinking about how to make a decision about where the wet season burns. So there's just the fire history in a single colour. All the white bits didn't burn. And then thinking about which parts of those are the frequently burnt grassy woodlands in the bright or the dark purples there, compared to the sandstone, for example, slightly to the east that doesn't burn as frequently. So next slide. So that's where we'll be targeting, is that on the next slide you'll see we've planned an aerial burning line in February this year, 2020. So a bit of an unusual season, low rainfall, which meant it was possible to burn in February. I guess these later wet season burns, the grass is longer, and like Andrew said, you do have the greenness in the spear grass does take the sting out of the fire, and also it doesn't get totally consumed. So there's, I guess, another strategy to reduce or maintain some surface cover is the wilted spear grass from this year. This kind of flight line would be exactly something we would do in April or May, targeting some of the older fuel that burns at that time of the year. But in this instance, we've done it in February, so it's had that, I think, the defining feature of wet season burning, which is burning it before the spear grass sets viable seed. So it has that, unusual ecological effect of totally changing the grass structure. And then in the next slide, you'll see how the rest of the year played out. So we are using those first burns to burn onto. I guess what we have achieved is another patch in the middle there that is now 3 years unburnt, which is really unusual for that type of countryside. Yeah, so that's I suppose on a landscape scale. So that wouldn't be, you'd probably see a similar thing in Kakadu in more recent years, and I think maybe something that is landscape scale wet season burning is actually hard to see on NAFI. It doesn't map so well that time of the year fire scars because of the cloud cover and the rainfall. So it might be more common than you think. And I guess I remember some of my early flights around, actually in Kakadu when I was burning there. I think lightning fires during the wet season were actually quite common, and you'd see these random patches of wet season burnt grassless areas that have obviously happened because of lightning and had that same ecological effect. That kind of relates to lightning fires. So there's something, I guess, ecologically, wet season burning isn't something that doesn't happen in prehistory, and also in human managed landscapes, and something that I guess has a place in the future too. So yeah, I guess that's an example of how common our fire management in more recent years, having halted the really extensive late season fires. Those big fires were hiding how prevalent lightning is in the landscape, and what an important player it is in, I guess, that time of the year. Yeah, that's all for now, I think.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks, Ben. And it was interesting to see your terminology of wet season fire as a graceful exit.